So, welcome everybody. Day 27th of the book reading, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. The breath. Discover inner space by creating gaps in the stream of thinking. Without those gaps, your thinking becomes repetitive, uninspired, devoid, or any creative spark, which is how it still is for most people on the planet. You don't need to be concerned with the duration of those gaps. A few seconds is good enough. Gradually, they will lengthen by themselves without any effort on your part. More important than their length is to bring them in frequently so that your daily activities and your stream of thinking become interspersed with space. Someone recently showed me the annual prospectus of a large spiritual organization. When I looked through it, I was impressed by the wide choice of interesting seminars and workshops. It reminded me of a smorgasbord, one of those Scandinavian buffets where you can take your pick from a huge variety of enticing dishes. The person asked me whether I could recommend one or two courses. I don't know, I said. They all look so interesting, but I do know this, I added. Be aware of your breathing as often as you are able. Whenever you remember, do that for 1 year, and it will be more powerfully transformative than attending all of these courses, and it's free. Being aware of your breathing takes attention from your thinking and creates space. It is one way of generating consciousness. Although the fullness of consciousness is already there as the unmanifested, we are here to bring consciousness into this dimension. Be aware of your breathing. Notice the sensation of the breath. Feel the air moving in and out of your body. Notice how the chest and abdomen expand and contract slightly with the in and out breath. One conscious breath is enough to make space where before there was the uninterrupted succession of one thought after another. One conscious breath, 2 or 3 would be even better. Taken many times a day is an excellent way of bringing space into your life. Even if you meditated on your breathing for 2 hours or more, which some people do, one breath is all you ever need to be aware of. Indeed, ever can be aware of. The rest is memory or anticipation, which is to say, thought. Breathing isn't really something that you do, but something that you witness as it happens. Breathing happens by itself. The intelligence within the body is doing it. All you have to do is watch it happening. There is no strain or effort involved. Also, notice the brief cessation of breath, particularly the still point at the end of the out breath before you start breathing in again. Many people breathe in many people's breath is unnaturally shallow. The more you are aware of the breath, the more its natural depth will re-establish itself. Because breath has no form as such. It has since ancient times been equated with spirit, the formless one life. God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. German word for breathing, Atman, is derived from the ancient Indian Sanskrit word Atma, meaning the indwelling divine spirit or God within. The fact that breath has no form is one of the reasons why breath awareness is an extremely effective way of bringing space into your life, of generating consciousness. It is an excellent meditation object precisely because it is not an object, has no shape or form. The other reason is that breath is one of the most subtle and seemingly insignificant phenomena, the least thing that, according to Nietzsche, makes up the best happiness. Whether or not you practice breath awareness as an actual formal meditation is up to you. Formal meditation, however, is no substitute for bringing space consciousness into everyday life. Being aware of your breath forces you into the present moment, the key to all inner transformation. Whenever you are conscious of the breath, you are absolutely present. You may also notice that you cannot think and be aware of your breathing. Conscious breathing stops your mind. I repeat, this is most powerful. Conscious breathing stops your mind. But far from being in a trance or half sleep, you're fully awake and highly alert. You're not falling below thinking, but rising above it. And if you look more closely, you will find that those two things, coming fully into the present moment and ceasing thinking without loss of consciousness, are actually one and the same thing, the arising of space consciousness. So breath takes a very important role. So because when we are consciously breathing, so breath is one where we are actually not conscious कि कितने सांस लिए हमने. You know, if somebody asks me, पिछले 1 मिनट में आपने कितने सांस लिए? I don't know because I'm not aware of it. It's constantly happening as part of this body mechanism कि हम उसको ध्यान ही नहीं देते. And a lot of days we go by and we never think कि यार कितनी breath ली थी मैंने, because we were not conscious about it. But the time when we make a conscious effort to be conscious about the breath, that is a very powerful way of stilling and calming the mind. Because then the mind has been given one agenda by us, and that is conscious breathing. माइंड फिर इधर उधर जल्दी नहीं भागेगा. ऐसा नहीं कि नहीं भागेगा, it will run after thoughts, but the more we try to get ourselves back into the now with consciously, seeing the breath is going in, is it going to, end till the navel, or is it only up till the diaphragm? Am I shallow breathing or am I deep breathing? So it's very important to be very, very aware and do it, say 1 minute, 2 minutes a day. It doesn't take more than that. It's like very simple. We can do it right now, wherever you are. If you want, you can have your eyes closed. If you want, you can have your eyes open. Absolutely good. But we're going to be following a rhythm of breathing where we are going to be taking 6 counts in, holding the breath for 3, then exhaling 6 counts, holding the breath for 3. And we will do 3 to 5 cycles. So it will be like this. Inhale, stop, exhale, stop, inhale, stop, exhale. So we'll do this. So 6 in, 3 hold, 6 out, and 3 hold. So I will be just working with the inhale, hold, release, hold, inhale, hold, release, hold. Okay, so we do this 3 cycles. Start. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold, inhale, hold, exhale, hold, inhale, hold, exhale, hold, inhale, hold, exhale, hold, inhale, normal breathing. अब इस पूरे 2 मिनट में या 1 मिनट में did the mind think anything? No matter what was going on,
No, it didn't.
it didn't. So जहां पे भी हम सोच रहे थे या हमारा थॉट जा रहा था, when we are in this phase of conscious breathing, we actually direct the mind to only focus on the breathing. बाकी सारी चीजें माइंड अब नहीं सोच रहा है. इट्स द सेम माइंड. अभी वो सोच रहा था, 15 मिनट पहले वो सोच रहा था, या आधा घंटा पहले वो सोच रहा था. इट कैन बी अ कांस्टेंट चैटर बॉक्स एट टाइम्स, but it is only when we get to conscious breathing, say about 1 minute 2 minute a day, यार दिन में 3 बार कर लो. And you can do it any, you can, the best part about conscious breathing is you don't need anything. All you need to do is your commitment and your awareness to do it. And it can be done at any given point of time, anywhere that makes you feel convenient. So just do it 2 to 3 times a day. This way we are able to get that mind still for that time. And especially when there is too much happening in your life, where you are, facing a lot of anxiety, feeling a lot worried, the best way is to actually resort to conscious breathing at that time. Because if we are able to do that, if you're aware that you have this tool now to get to use it in your day-to-day life, nothing better than this. And this conscious breathing is being practiced by all you talk about yogis, you talk about gurus, saints, everybody does this because it's the most common and it's one of the easiest ways to actually, not let your mind divert here and there and be present in the now, because the mind is so occupied with the exercise of conscious breathing that it does not even think for a second about other things. Addictions. A long standing compulsive behavior pattern may be called an addiction, and an addiction lives inside you as a quasi entry or a sub-personality, an energy field that periodically takes you over completely. It even takes over your mind, the voice in your head, which then becomes the voice of the addiction. It may be saying, "You've had a rough day, you deserve a treat. Why deny yourself the only pleasure that is left in your life?" And so. If you are identified with the internal voice due to the lack of awareness, and you find yourself walking to the fridge and reaching for that rich chocolate cake, at other times the addiction may bypass the thinking mind completely, and you suddenly find yourself puffing a cigarette or holding a drink. How did that get into my hand? Taking the cigarette out of the packet and lighting it or pouring yourself a drink were actions performed in complete unconsciousness. If you have a compulsive behavior pattern such as smoking, overeating, drinking, TV watching, internet addiction, or whatever it may be, this is what you can do. When you notice the compulsive need arising in you, stop and take 3 conscious breaths. This generates awareness. And for a few minutes, be aware of the compulsive urge itself as an energy field inside you. Consciously feel that need to physically or mentally ingest or consume a certain substance, or the desire to act out some form of compulsive behavior. Then take a few more conscious breaths. After that, you may find that the compulsive urge has disappeared for the first time, or you may find that it still overpowers you and you cannot help but indulge or act it out again. Don't make it into a problem. Make the addiction part of your awareness practice in the way described above. As the awareness grows, addictive patterns will weaken and eventually dissolve. Remember, however, to catch any thoughts that justify the addictive behavior, sometimes with clever arguments as they arise in your mind. Ask yourself, who is talking here? And you will realize the addiction is talking. As long as you know that, as long as you are present as the observer of your mind, it is less likely to trick into doing what it wants. So when you're talking about addictions, maybe it's food craving, maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's drugs, maybe it's smoking, any kind of addiction, there is always going to be that voice which is telling you stop, and there's always going to be an overpowering voice telling you to do it. Okay, it is only at that time when you get to conscious breathing 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, that you are able to bypass or surpass that trigger. Because at the end of the day, anything to do with addiction has to do with a trigger. जब वो ट्रिगर हिट होता है, that's where the signals are sent from the brain. Okay, this can be overcome by this. Not because that's a remedy, but because it's in your memory pattern. कि पिछली बार ये हुआ था, मैंने ये किया था, I felt better. So that's a memory that is registered. And if that memory gets registered over and over again, there's a beautiful neurological pathway that is formed. So, it's a very clear indication now. Trigger, voice, action. So, in order to break that, there has to be a gap because that trigger has a validity for a particular time. If during that time we've caught ourselves being aware about the trigger, about the voice of the addiction, and practice the conscious breathing at that particular trigger timing and dissolved the effects of that trigger that uh, caused that craving, that is where you can actually work with your addiction. And conscious breathing is by far the one of the most important ways, because then the mind is not thinking anything else. It is not thinking about what the voice is saying. It is not thinking about or dwelling upon what the trigger was. It is only in the breath that the mind gets diverted. Inner body awareness. Another simple but highly effective way of finding space in your life is closely linked to the breath. You will find that by feeling the subtle flow of air in and out of the body, as well as the rise and fall of your chest and abdomen, you are becoming aware of the inner body. Your attention may then shift from the breath to that felt aliveness within you, diffused throughout the body. Most people are so distracted by their thoughts, so identified with the voices in their heads, they can no longer feel the aliveness within them. To be unable to feel the life that animates the physical body, the very life that you are, is the greatest deprivation that can happen to you. You then begin to look not only for substitutes for the natural state of well being within, but also for something to cover up the continuous unease that you feel when you are not in touch with the aliveness that is always there, but usually overlooked. Some of the substitutes people seek out are drug-induced highs, sensory overstimulation, such as excessively loud music, thrills, or dangerous activities, or an obsession with sex. Even drama in relationships is used as a substitute for that genuine sense of aliveness. The most sought after cover up for the continuous background unease are intimate relationships. A man or a woman who is going to make me happy. It is, of course, also one of the most frequently experienced of all the letdowns. And when the unease surfaces again, people will usually blame their partner for it. Take 2 or 3 conscious breaths. Now, see if you can detect a subtle sense of aliveness that pervades your entire inner body. Can you feel your body from within, so to speak? Sense briefly specific parts of your body. Feel your hands, then your arms, feet, and leg. Can you feel your abdomen, chest, neck, and head? What about your lips? Is there life in them? Then become aware of the inner body as a whole. You may want to close your eyes initially for this practice, and once you can feel your body, open your eyes, look around, and continue to feel your body. At the same time, some readers may find there is no need to close their eyes. They can, in fact, feel their inner body as they read this. So when we are talking about inner body awareness, it's very important to get in touch with what is there inside. Because, a lot of times we are not aware. I mean, I remember when we were doing the book Magic and we talked about magical health. So we were thanking each and every part of our body, including our fingers, muscles, cells, tissues, organs, glands, each and everything. Because your physical body is a complete phenomena in itself. When we talk about that inner body awareness, and when we use the conscious breathing to actually get in touch with that what is inside, because देखने में तो हमें खाली skin दिख रही है, and skin is what distinguishes every human being, because that's a barrier. Okay, for me, for my boundary towards your boundary, it's the skin that defines the boundary. That's the boundary of the body. But what is inside of this boundary is the inner body. And that is what we need to be aware of. Because if this is somebody else's hand and this is my hand, this touch defines the boundary of this is touching the boundary of this. And what we are doing currently is we are only in the boundary awareness, where we are only talking about our, physical boundaries. But what is more important is to be aware of what is inside of us. And that includes an inner body where we need to be present fully by feeling our hands inside, by feeling our arms, legs, feet, tongue, heart. It's a beautiful mechanism at play. So once we get on to, conscious breathing, we actually also become present to that inner body, which is inside of us. And rather than, be governed by this physical body, this boundary body, which is defined by the skin and which is outside of us. Inner and outer space. Your inner body is not solid, but spacious. It is not your physical form, but the life that animates the physical form. It is the intelligence that created and sustains the body, simultaneously coordinating hundreds of different functions of such extraordinary complexity that the human mind can only understand a tiny fraction of it. When you become aware of it, what is really happening is that the intelligence is becoming aware of itself. It is the elusive life that no scientist has ever found, because the consciousness that is looking for it is it. Physicists have discovered that the apparent solidity of matter is an illusion created by our senses. This includes the physical body, which we perceive and think of as form, but 99.99% of which is actually empty space. This is how vast the space is between the atoms compared to their size, and there is as much space again within each atom. The physical body is no more than a misperception of who we are. In many ways, it is a microcosmic version of outer space. To give you an idea of how vast the space in between celestial bodies, consider this. Light traveling at a constant speed of 1,86,000 miles, 3 lakh kilometers per second, just takes over 1 second to travel between Earth and the Moon. Light from the Sun takes about 8 minutes to reach. Light from our nearest neighbor in space, a star called Proxima Centauri, which is the sun that is closest to our own sun, travels for 4.5 years before it reaches the Earth. This is how vast space is that surrounds us. And then there is intergalactic space, whose vastness defies all comprehension. Light from the galaxy closest to our own, the Andromeda galaxy, takes 2.4 million years to reach us. Isn't it amazing that your body is just as spacious as the universe? So your physical body.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sure. So your physical body, which is form, reveals itself as essentially formless when you go deeper into it. It becomes a doorway into inner space, although inner space has no form. It is intensely alive. That empty space is life in its fullness, the unmanifested source out of which all manifestation flows. The traditional word for that source is God. Thoughts and words belong to the world of form. They cannot express the formless. So when you say, I can feel my inner body, that is a misperception created by thought. What is really happening is that the consciousness that appears as the body, the consciousness that I am, is becoming conscious of itself. When I no longer confuse who I am with the temporary form of me, then the dimensions of the limitless and the eternal, God can express itself through me and guide me. It also feels me from depending on form. However, a purely intellectual recognition or belief, I am not this form, does not help. The all important question is, at this moment, can I sense the presence of inner space? Which really means, can I sense my own presence, or rather, the presence that I am? Or we can approach this truth sign in a different point. Ask yourself, am I aware not only of what is happening at this moment, but also of the now itself as the living, timeless inner space in which everything happens? Although this question seems to have nothing to do with the inner body, you may be surprised that by becoming aware of the space of now, you suddenly feel more alive inside. You are feeling the aliveness of the inner body, the aliveness that is an intrinsic part of the joy of being. We have to enter the body to go beyond it and find out that we are not that. as much as possible in everyday life. Use awareness of the inner body to create space. When waiting, when listening to someone, when pausing to look at sky, a tree, a flower, your partner or child, feel the aliveness within all the same time. This means part of your attention or consciousness remains formless and the rest is available for the outer world of form. When you inhabit your body in this way, it serves as an anchor for staying present in the now. It prevents you from losing yourself in thinking, in emotions, and in external situations. When you think, feel, perceive, and experience, consciousness is born into form. It is reincarnating into a thought, a feeling, a sense perception, an experience. The cycles of rebirth that Buddhists hope to get out of eventually is happening continuously, and it is only at this moment, through the power of now, that you can get out of it. Through complete acceptance of the form of now, you become internally aligned with space, which is the essence of now. Through acceptance, you become spacious inside, aligned with space instead of form. That brings true perspective and balance into your life. So when you're talking about inner space and inner and outer space, it's very important to be aware that ये जो हमें दिख रहा है ना खाली खाली जो space में है, I mean, it's not empty. It's actually energy particles which are not visible to the, the naked eye. But it's not that it is empty. Because, everything that travels, like light when travels, it needs a carrier, okay? That carrier is that energy which is there in the space. So the light from the sun takes about 8 minutes to reach. So when we are talking about sunset or sunrise, it takes nearly 7 to 8 minutes for the full light to travel. And how does light travel? It needs a carrier, and that space is the carrier. So that space is energy. Similarly, there is an inner space inside of us, which is also the energy body inside of us, which is, present inside, which is nothing but a realization of our inner self, where you actually get to dwell and see the source or get connected to that source or the God, the Almighty Energy Universe, whatever name you want to call it. The author very rightly said traditionally it was called God, but now God has so many different notions attached to it that a lot of people don't use that word. But that's the connection, from where it starts. And it's not something that we can go, काट के देखो कि ये मिल जाएगा. It's a realization of what is inside of us, which is there. Because if you think, where are your thoughts? इतने thoughts हैं, कहाँ हैं? दिख रहे हैं? नहीं. Why? इतने तो thoughts हैं. मेरे को इतनी बुक्स दिखती है और वो तो फॉर्म में है, बट मेरे थॉट्स तो दिख ही नहीं रहे मुझे. The reason is because thoughts are also formless. They do not have a quantifiable form. And that is where the confusion also happens, where we get identified with our thought. Because that confusion is that true serenity lies in the formless, which does not have a form. And similarly, our thought also does not have a form. But what is inside of us also is a formless inner space where which we can be connected to the source by realizing and feeling the same. Noticing the gaps. Throughout the day, there is continuously changing succession of things that you see and hear. In the first moment of seeing something or hearing a sound, and more so if it is unfamiliar, before the mind names or interprets what you see or hear, there is usually a gap of alert attention in which the perception occurs. That is the inner space. Its duration differs from person to person. It is easy to miss because in many people, those spaces are extremely short, perhaps only a second or less. This is what happens. A new sight or sound arises, and in the first moment of perception, there is a brief cessation in the habitual stream of thinking. Consciousness is diverted away from thought because it is required for sense perception. A very unusual sight or sound may leave you speechless, even inside, that is to say, bring about a longer gap. The frequency and duration of those spaces determine your ability to enjoy life, to feel an inner connectedness with other human beings as well as nature. It also determines the degree to which you are free of ego, because ego implies complete unawareness of that dimension of space. When you become conscious of these brief spaces, they happen naturally. They will lengthen. And as they do, you will experience with increasing frequency the joy of perceiving with little or no interference of thinking. The world around you then feels fresh, new, and alive. The more you perceive life through a mental screen of abstraction and conceptualization, the more lifeless and flat the world around you becomes. And it's very important to note here, बिकॉज जो हमारे रिफ्लक्स होते हैं ना, एकदम से जो हमारे रिएक्शंस निकलते हैं, दोज आर वेयर द गैप इज द मिनिमम. किसी ने कुछ बोला, फट से गुस्सा. किसी ने कुछ बोला, फट से जवाब. We are actually unaware of what the other person is saying at that time, and in a lot of cases the reply has already been made by the mind, and the mind is actually not present to the other person who is saying or doing anything. It is just waiting for that buzzer to hit stop and then play. That's exactly what it happens. Because when you are becoming a conscious listener, tabab, you are not listening to the other person with the intent of replying. You are listening to the other person with the intent of absorbing. And जब वो बंदा कोई चीज बोलता है, it will take you time to absorb what the other person is saying, and then from your memory bank retrieve a question or a reply which now makes more sense to you in this situation. Because अगर वो फट से आ रहा है, that means there is no gap, and that gap is your thinking gap. That gap is your basically your absorbing gap, जहाँ पे आप information को absorb कर रहे हो rather than react कर. So it's very important, whenever the other person is doing, to be present to what the other person is saying, listen, absorb, and then if you have to say anything, then say. Because then that gap will, get you at a better place for you to respond well and not react in that situation. Lose yourself to find yourself. Inner space also arises when you let go of the need to emphasize your form identity. The need is of the ego. It is not a true need. We have already touched briefly upon this. Whenever you relinquish one of these behavior patterns, inner space emerges. You become more truly yourself to the ego, as it seemed as if you were losing yourself. But the opposite is the case. Jesus already taught that you need to lose yourself to find yourself. Whenever you let go of one of these patterns and you de emphasize who you are on the level of form, and who you are beyond form emerges more fully. You become less so you can be more. Here are some ways in which people unconsciously try to emphasize their form identity. If you are alert enough, you may be to detect some of these unconscious patterns within yourself, demanding recognition for something you did and getting angry or upset if you didn't get it, trying to get attention by talking about your problems, the story of your illnesses, or making a scene, giving your opinion when nobody has asked for it and it makes no difference to the situation, being more concerned with how the other person sees you with the other person, which is to say, using other people for egoic reflection or as an ego enhancers, trying to make an impression on others through possessions, knowledge, good looks, status, physical strength, and so on, bringing about temporary ego inflation through angry reaction against something to someone, taking things personally, feeling offended, making yourself right and others wrong through futile mental or verbal complaining, wanting to be seen or to appear important. Once you have detected such a pattern within yourself, I suggest that you conduct an experiment, find out what it feels like, what happens if you let go of the pattern. Just drop it and see what happens. De emphasizing who you are on the level of form is another way of generating consciousness. Discover the enormous power that flows through you into this world when you set emphasizingly your form identity. I repeat, de emphasizing who you are on the level of form is another way of generating consciousness, because who you are in that form is that name identity जिसको हम पकड़ के बैठे हुए हैं, and that is nothing but an experience of ours. That is not who we are, but हम वो it's the ego gets so attracted towards that name identity that we actually end up losing ourselves rather than finding ourselves, because we've lost it to that name identity na? Each and everything we are doing, or each and everything that we are thinking, each and everything that is happening to us is all revolving around that name identity. But is that who I really am? That's the question we need to ask. So when we de-emphasize ourselves from that name identity, from that form identity which is there on this school of earth, that is another way of generating the consciousness inside of us. And it's a beautiful reflection of all the patterns that we as individuals, follow. Sometimes of the other, they are nothing but the projections of the egoistic mind. Stillness. It has been said, stillness is the language God speaks, and everything else is a bad translation. Stillness is really another word for space. Becoming conscious of stillness whenever we encounter it in our lives will connect us with the formless and timeless dimension within ourselves, that which is beyond thought, beyond. It may be the stillness that pervades the world of nature, or the stillness in your room in the early hours of the morning, or the silent gaps in between sounds. Stillness has no form. That is why through thinking we cannot become aware of it. Thought is form. Being aware of stillness means to be still. To be still is to be conscious without thought. You are never essentially more deeply yourself than when you are still. When you are still, you are who you were before you temporarily assumed this physical and mental form called a person. You are also who you will be when the form dissolves. When you are still, You are who you are beyond your temporal existence. Consciousness, unconditioned, formless, eternal.